I'm going to do this one. I had the chance to tell Susan over lunch some prior stories to that one. I was an untrained, uncertificated superintendent in a state that allowed such a thing. And even though I had a lot of corporate experience, I had never worked in a school district. So my first year there, I went around saying and doing things that caused explosions. We were breaking things, and really bad things would happen, and I would go back to Kenneth's office and say, Kenneth, I did something bad again. Can you help me fix it? I need a 2-day miracle. And so Kenneth was kind of my fixer. He would organize a meeting. We'd get everybody back in a room and sing Kumbaya and put the train back on the tracks and go down the tracks again, hurtling at breakneck speed until I did something dumb again. So Kenneth and I developed a great respect for each other. Well, I developed great respect for him. He probably got sick of me. But we worked together a lot before that fateful moment. All right, I've decided I'm only going to use these slides if you want to talk about that. But I was inspired particularly by the young speakers this morning to start by talking about learning. I think there's two kinds of learning. There's lightning and there's bubbles bursting. I want you to first think about lightning. Bill Stafford was the poet laureate of Oregon, and Bill said, learning, that unanticipated lightning. You think around an issue and it comes right. And you're not sure whether the connection was yours or the world's, but you suddenly say, I know. I know. And don't you love it when you work with kids, when you see that light bulb, that lightning moment? Can each of you think of an example of that? Of a lightning moment where you saw a kid's eyes light up because they made this magical connection, right? What are you thinking of?
Geometry.
In geometry.
Yeah, I'm thinking about geometry. When they, the shapes.
Hold that.
Shapes, not knowing a particular shape and looking at the hexagon versus all the others, and then all of a sudden, wow, I got it.
Yeah.
But I came up with an innovative way for them to remember it, and they had to stand up, and I'm retired now.
Yeah.
But they had to do it with hand signals.
Yeah.
Using their hands.
But if you move,
and they moved,
right,
and
or you connect it with sound or music,
it made a difference.
goes straight to the long-term memory.
Made a difference.
So that magic of when a formula turned into understanding, right?
Yes.
Can you think of a lightning moment, a light bulb moment?
So we see it a lot, and we deal with community college students. We're high school students taking community college classes, and in our welding class especially, we go in and we talk to them about what welding is. We can teach you the skills of welding, but it takes more than just learning how to join two pieces of metal together to become a welder. And we'll get them in the welding lab, and after 2 or 3 weeks they can join two pieces of metal together. But then we start talking about the job opportunities, and we start taking them to places and let them see what the job sites are, and that's when the aha moment hits for them.
Cool. Any primary teachers? Former primary teachers? When do you see the light bulbs go off, the lightning strike?
Well, when I taught first grade for 20 years, and teaching when they read.
Yeah.
They can read a book.
Right.
That was my aha.
Yeah.
That was kind of like my high, sort of.
Yeah. Oh, it
As a teacher.
totally is. And the superintendents in the audience, right? When you have a bad day with your school board, you go to a kindergarten or a first grade classroom, and you can see the light bulbs. You can see a sound becoming a word, becoming meaning, right? And each of those result in these wonderful lightning strikes. You guys seen any lightning strikes?
In music.
In music, really?
Yeah, so students who are learning to play the piano, and it's just a set of disconnected notes, and then when they put it together in the right way, it makes beautiful music.
Yeah. Yeah, no, the first time you hear yourself making beautiful music is like lightning. We're not going to talk about that kind of learning today. We're going to talk about the other kind of learning. The other kind of learning was best described for me by Louis MacNeice. He was an English poet. I love the angsty World War II poets. I like the Polish poets, Milosz and Szymborska. And Louis MacNeice, right between the wars, you can imagine him sitting in Wales looking across the channel as the world that he understood is coming apart, right? Where it's obvious that they're going to go back to war. And he said, each of us knows mutations of the mind when the world jumped, when plans dissolve and rivers gush what had seemed a pool. For every static world that you or I impose on the real one must crack at times. And new order rise like a rose. And then he ends that poem by saying, surprises keep us living. But the idea that every static world that you or I construct and sort of impose on the real one, it has to break every once in a while. And that's a picture of bubbles bursting. When the mental model that we've run our world by, that set of knowledge and understandings that we use to process how we get along with other people and the stuff that we do every day, when we realize it's broken, that it no longer works with the world that we live in. Think of a couple examples of that, where the way you thought about the world is suddenly ineffectual, that you realize that you have to reconstruct how you think about the world that you live in. You think of an example of that? What's that?
Every day.
Every day?
Well, with technology and
Yeah.
how fast things change,
Yeah.
you have to learn different ways to do things.
Right.
And then you end up calling your son to tell you.
Yeah,
to figure it
totally.
out.
So I'm the only one on my team that hasn't switched from Apple Mail to Gmail, right? And I'm like terrified of this, right? I have like 6 email addresses and 43,000 emails in there. It's like, please don't make me change. So technology in little ways, right? Other ways though? Did you have one?
I was saying that basically like the advent of the personal computer.
Oh, the personal computer.
When I came through, it was just,
Yeah.
it was before that. So,
Right.
Yeah.
No, I started as an engineer, so I did all my drafting on a table with a pencil, right? I went to school before they had things called computers, right? What other examples of how when the model you had of how the world worked broke? Huh?
You know me.
Back when I started consulting with organizations and the silos,
Yeah.
actually, because of industrialization, the silos worked.
Right,
And then all of a sudden,
They didn't.
in the 80s, they did
Yeah.
not work anymore.
right. So
And
like,
there had to be collaboration and cross-fertilization and talking with each other.
yeah, so the whole
Model.
corporate monoliths that we created didn't work.
Yeah.
Right, and right after that, I was in business process engineering. That's what I was doing right before I became a superintendent, because
Right.
we were both trying to re-engineer how our corporations were beginning to use technology. What else? Yeah,
This is kind of a sad one, but for me, I had grown up in a family that was loving, and I became a teacher, then became
Yeah.
a counselor. And I think I was a young adult, and I realized that not
every
everybody's
family,
parent
right.
had their best interest at
Yeah,
heart.
right.
And that parents wouldn't do for their children what needed to be done.
yeah. That's really a sad one to come, right? It's sort of like, ooh, I thought I lived in this world, but actually most of the kids that I work with live in a different world. Yeah. Another one? Yeah. Shout it out.
The role of the students changed.
The role of student,
and
right?
The teacher-student relationship. was
Right.
The teacher's more the facilitator than what it has been in the past.
Right. So this is super profound, and let's go down this rat hole a minute. Let's not underestimate how big a deal this is. Like, because we're going to talk about blended and personalized and competency-based learning. This is not just, as Doug Lamar would say, a new move. This is not like waiting longer after you ask a question. This is a completely different role. This is like changing your identity as a professional about who you are and what you do, right? It's a different way to be as a professional. So it's not like, oh, I just have to go get some professional development so I do some things differently. This is like, oh wow, this is a whole different job. It's a whole different mindset. So let's not forget, if we're school leaders or superintendents, that this isn't just about skills. This is about how we think about ourselves as learning professionals.
This may not, or this may be slightly off topic, but it
We
was
love
one
being
of the
off
most
topic.
amazing things I've ever seen. A group of kids from DeWitt, Arkansas, I believe, were doing a presentation to the Anti-Tobacco Coalition, where they were doing a pretty sophisticated little project trying to work on smoking cessation.
Right.
But in the course of their work, what they had discovered was that they needed to be targeting the 3rd and 4th graders.
Wow.
And if you've ever seen an entire room full of people who have been spending Philip Morris and the state and federal government's money on tobacco programs in the 7th and 8th grade, discovered that they were starting 4 years earlier, and so they had been wasting money for 5 years.
Right.
Their brains just broke.
Right. No, that's great. It's no, that's awful, but it is pertinent. Mental models going amiss.
Changing demographics.
Yeah.
Culturally, ethnically,
Right.
linguistically.
Totally.
Refugees.
Yeah.
Immigrants. And so the
Yeah.
mindset of how you were trained as a professional, as
Yeah.
a teacher, and then now all of a sudden, brand new population.
Yeah. And in some places, this happens quickly, like from one school year to the next, boundary changes, oh, we got a different student population, but most places it happens really gradually, right? And so it's just something that happens, an event, where you realize my student population is radically different than when I started. Maybe that we should take that into account. Yes?
I have one, just our students coming in and learning about privilege, you can kind of see their world
Yeah.
exploding a little bit.
Yeah.
Thinking that maybe they didn't have privilege, but recognizing that they do actually.
Right.
It's been very mind-blowing for some of our students.
And just coming to grips with all forms of privilege, right? It can, for all of us, be mind exploding. I don't know about you, but I woke up on November 9 after the election. My head exploded. But here's why I say that. This is not going to be a political statement, but I had come to think of America on one domain of sort of a left-right standoff. And I realized on the 9th of November that there's actually this whole orthogonal thing going on that was really around people that feel they benefit from and are plugged into a global economy, right, where they value openness and transparency and trade and innovation. And there's a bunch of people that feel completely betrayed by the global economy, that feel completely left out, that feel victimized by the income inequality that we're talking about, right? And I thought, wow, I thought the country lived on this divide, but it actually lives on a very different divide. I live in a different country than I thought I did yesterday. I need a new kind of social science model.
I think how educators are seen has changed. Or
Good or bad?
Well, I think in some cases we're viewed differently, not having the esteem that we once had.
Yes.
Or maybe it was always like that. Now folks were willing to speak out against it.
Well, but it's like the death of the expert everywhere, right? My dad's a doctor. He would say, people Google stuff, or if they come and see him, ask your minister or ask your accountant or ask your lawyer. They're all going through some of the same death of the expert stuff, right?
So I think how we approach our communities and our parents, we've got to rethink that process and make sure we're establishing those relationships and trust.
Right.
Try to build it up locally.
Yeah, Susan and I were talking about this at lunch. This is part of the reason my crazy community hired me, because they were sort of infatuated by this kid that didn't know anything. But here's how I answered questions. I would say, I don't know the answer to that, but here's how we might think about it together. So it was the sort of humility to engage the community in design thinking about the path forward. Here's the really interesting thing. If I ever did decide to go back to being a superintendent, I don't think I'd have the intellectual humility to use that answer. I'd say, well, obviously I know the answer to that now. I wrote a book about it. Here's the answer, right? And that would be the completely wrong approach. The right approach is, here's how we might think about it together.
Superintendent,
Yes, sir.
It was me. A bubble buster for me was college education in the job market.
Yeah.
My parents, some parents didn't go to college.
Yeah.
And made more money back then than a lot of people that have college degrees making right now.
Yeah.
And
Right.
my parents stayed on their job forever. They thought I was crazy the first time I
Yeah.
quit a job.
Yeah.
They thought I was, you don't quit jobs.
Yeah.
So, that's changed.
So the whole jobs escalator in America, right? The bargain that we grew up with was just go to college, everything's gonna be okay, right? And you get on that American escalator and you get whatever degree you want and you come out and you get a good job and you do better than your parents, right? And that's America, and it broke, right? And for a lot of kids, the escalator stopped halfway up and they left and they had 100 grand of debt and they had no degree and they have this new worst case scenario, right? So talk about a new mental model. Yes?
Okay, one thing I would like to talk about is children with special needs and autism.
Yeah.
I teach those type of children, and most teachers, regular teachers, they just don't want to face that, but they have needs and they have ideas and they can perform too.
Right?
I've
So-
had them to, show me stuff just like
Yeah.
that, but you have to give them time.
And you have to show them some counterfactual arguments, right? Here's kids that can, not kids that can't.
Yeah.
So why that exercise? I want to give you 4 points that I'm sort of working through in my own mental model that make me think differently about America and about what it means to be educated. For the last year, I've been studying artificial intelligence. And I have come to the conclusion that life with smart machines will do more to alter the lives and livelihoods of the young people that we work with than anything else. It's a really big deal. It's really profound. Here's a couple ways that I think about it. So I have this spectacular 2-year-old granddaughter. I don't even have a gratuitous picture of her in my deck. I usually do. But here's how I think about her life. So when she goes to school in a couple years, there'll be 7 billion people and 75 billion devices connected on the planet. And all of those devices are creating data. Even jet engines, like there's 100 sensors on a jet engine now, and a flight from New York to Chicago creates a terabyte of data. Right, so everything around us is connected to the internet and spewing giant amounts of data. In the old days, like 5 years ago, we used to program computers to do certain things. And now with machine learning, we're actually feeding them data and asking them to learn. And in many cases, they're coding themselves, right? So they're learning by eating this data, and they're often doing things that we wouldn't have thought to teach them to do. So like when AlphaGo beat the top Go player in the world, that's like three-dimensional chess, it was because the program ingested millions of games and figured out some stuff that the best Go players in the world didn't know, right? It got better by playing itself in Go, millions and millions of times, over and over again. And this is happening in every aspect of life now. It's happening in transportation, it's happening in healthcare. It's beginning to happen in education, although less quickly. So I think about little Charlie and what life is going to be like when 2 or 3 years from now when she starts school. So she will interact with a bunch of computers, and she'll not only do it with touch, she'll do it with voice. We're beginning to do that with a voice UI. She will use her eyes. She'll even, maybe this is 5 years away, use her brain. There's a couple different ways that could happen where there's a brain-computer interface. Elon Musk is working on this right now. So with all these different UIs, the user interfaces, she'll have 24/7 augmented reality. right? So that she'll be able to interact with several computers anytime she's awake and conscious in a couple ways, right? So it'll be ubiquitous, intimate computing that she's living with. She will probably never drive. Not unless she takes the barn out of the pickup truck at the farm and takes it for a spin. She probably won't understand why we had all these cars and drove ourselves places. She will probably, in her middle grades, when she's in 3rd or 4th grade, work with an advisor and an algorithm to co-construct her own learning pathway. And she'll progress on demonstration. And like kids at New Tech School, she'll spend a lot of time co-constructing projects that she's really interested in. And a really smart advisor and a really smart algorithm will help pack those projects full of important knowledge, skills, and dispositions. She'll probably learn at a lot of different places, but she probably won't have to drive herself there. And she'll have this rich profile that will travel with her, that she'll be able to share parts of with different learning providers. We've launched a campaign called Ask About AI, hashtag Ask About AI. I've written about 50 blogs on this topic, and it's basically a plea for you to have this conversation with your kids. I don't know what the heck this all means, like for the Chamber of Commerce here. I don't know what it means for your school. I just know that it's such a big deal that we need to be having the conversation. I was in a Energy Institute High School in Houston 4 weeks ago. This is the first school that I've been into that's having this conversation. There was a project that they had framed that said, how are robots and artificial intelligence going to impact my life? That's a question every high school student in America should write an essay about, make a presentation about. They should spend a month thinking about that. If your kids aren't doing that, go back and put that on the board docket or tell your high school folks to find time to do it. Every high school kid in America should write an essay on how's robotics and AI, the combination of those two, going to impact my life, my health, my livelihood. So that's point number one. AI is a really, really big deal. Be a humble learner. What I try to do, I listen to about 6 AI and machine learning podcasts. I don't know what the hell they're talking about, but I just think it's important that I try to understand what the conversation that they're having so that I can be an informed educator and answer the question for myself, what should graduates know and be able to do, right? What does it mean for my community? What does it mean for our local businesses? How can we better serve our community and our businesses? So AI is a big deal. Number 2, related to that, Susan and I were talking about this at lunch. You hear a lot of bad stuff on the news. I watched the news last night. It was like bad stuff happened here, bad stuff happened here, and there's a tornado, and so bad stuff might happen there. And so we get the impression that we're living in a time when a lot of bad stuff happens. There's never been a better time in history. We are living longer. We are richer. We are safer in a period of abundance, unlike anything else in human history. Technology has helped to bring 1 billion people out of dire poverty in the last decade. Things are getting better. And there's never been a better chance for you or your kids to make a difference. The learning opportunity gets better every single month. When you think about the learning models and the learning tools that are being developed quickly now, this is much different than, we started Learn Capital, the first education venture fund, in 2008. There was like 0 R&D spent. There was no venture capital flowing to education startups. There was $3 billion spent last year on education startups. So the learning opportunity set gets better every single month. We're seeing a proliferation of learning models all over the planet. I was in South Africa in December, and I visited Blended School where I coached a couple kids from an MBA program to launch a blended school. And I saw them take a US blended model and then add design thinking to it and make it cooler than anything I'd seen in this country. Right, so we're seeing cool stuff happen around the planet. We're seeing cool things happen in youth development. We're seeing cool things happening in the adult learning space. Cool things like we saw this morning where companies are building on-ramps for people to run big robotic welders. So there's never been a better time to be an educator thinking about creating powerful learning experiences for kids. And the flip side of that, what I want you to tell your kids every single week, there's never been a better chance for you to make a difference. It's never been easier to start a business. It's never been easier to code an app. It's never been easier to create a campaign that goes viral. Like for nothing, if you're thoughtful, if you're creative, if you're silly, you can be a global phenomenon next week. Just think about the last 20 years. The price of computing has gone to zero. The price of storage has gone to zero. The price of connectivity, I still pay $100 for cable. It's not zero, but right, the price of connectivity has plummeted. The amount of open resources that are available to you and your kids are extraordinary. So now the new opportunity set that is in front of our kids, we call it code plus cause. The opportunity is to find a problem that you're really passionate about and to get smart about that fast. And now there's lots of ways that you can do it, right? You can go online and you can watch videos and you can study Instagram and you can very quickly become smarter than anybody in your local community about a particular issue. So pick an issue, get smart fast. The third thing is find a big data set. This is data wrangling. This is what comes after coding. A lot of you are teaching coding in your schools now. What's after coding is data wrangling, because computers are gonna do a lot of the coding. The creative thing is, what problem do I want to work on? What do I need to know? What partnerships do I need to form to find data, right? If you want to work on clean water in your community, where am I going to find data sets about water? If you want to work on air quality in your community as a young person, where are you going to find those data sets? In almost every case, if you want to work on a big problem, you need to assemble a big data set, and you're going to have to create a set of partnerships to wrangle data. So this new skill of wayfinding, problem finding, of getting smart fast, right? Learning how to learn. Number 3, data wrangling, and then a little bit of coding and understanding how to launch a campaign at the end. That is cause plus code. That new formula will allow anybody to tackle really big and important problems, either by themselves or with a team. So I would love young people to have the chance to mess around with small forms of that cause plus code formula. Kids at New Tech get a chance to do that, to work on big integrated projects where they get time to go deep on something and do meaningful work that is important to them, that's important to their community. So AI is a big deal. What that means is it's scary as heck in terms of the existential threats that it causes, but the flip side is it's part of why there's never been a better chance to make a difference, why kids in North Arkansas can change the world if they believe it and they have a few skills. That's the cool thing. You can change the world from anywhere, right? You can, and it doesn't have to be taking on a world problem, but it can be taking on the thoughtful way that you take on the clean water problem, the clean air problem, the economic development problem in North Arkansas. All right, number 3, new learning models are really, really promising, but they're really complicated. So Kristen talked about personalized project-based learning. So I love the construct that New Tech has created, where it's wall-to-wall projects, but they have a really sophisticated platform that helps you incorporate personalized learning, right? So in a lot of ways that every kid can have a unique skill-building progression. So my last point is partnerships matter a lot. Partnerships matter a lot. If you want to do important work, you will probably need really good partners to do it. There are a few networks, there are a few districts that are smart enough to do this on their own. Most of us need partners to do it. We need higher ed partners. We need school design partners like New Tech. We need intermediaries that give us inspiration and incubation and intermediation, that bring expertise. We, as educators, we need to plug into professional learning communities so that we're learning with other adults. So partnerships have never mattered more. I'm going to stop there and see what you want to talk about. Those are like 4 postulates for today. Do you buy any of those, or? Yes.
I have a question about, so you talked a little bit about how we're living in a different America than you originally thought. How do you see the role of technology really interfacing with the need to change hearts and minds and particularly dialogue and bring people together? Because a lot of times technology has a way to isolate us. So while it's very beneficial in learning, do you also see it as detrimental, and how can we use it to break down the barriers?
So that's a super point. So we live and learn and work on platforms now. There's a great new book out by Sangeet Chowdhury called Platform Revolution. We've reviewed it on gettingsmart.com if you want to see the Cliff Notes version. I have a podcast with him that is a great kind of explainer for what the platform revolution means. And I would say that Sangeet and I are sort of tech optimists, and we thought that things like Facebook and the internet, that these blog sites would level up, right? That would improve our civic dialogue, that would create a platform of truth where there was sort of a inarguable fact set. And instead, what we learned last fall is that we live in information gullies, right? Where we're all subjected to, in part because of the algorithms that we talked about, right? Who are really smart, who know you, and who know people that think like you. And those things, your choices and your algorithms sort of put you in this narrower and narrower gully, so that your view of the world is shaped by people that you agree with. And we all were subjected to a ton of fake news last year. Both sides were making stuff up. And we also learned that our kids don't know the difference between real news and fake news. So your point's super important. This stuff hasn't worked out as well as we hoped. And so this is one area where we need to be really, really diligent. The answer to your question's really complicated, and it's not simple at all. So part of it is the advocacy that forced Zuckerberg and his colleagues at Facebook to begin to try to unravel the disaster of fake news that he helped create. So it's being an activist, but it's also being metacognitive about the algorithms that are affecting our lives, and not being afraid to ask people, I'd like to understand the biases that are intrinsic to the algorithms in your black box. Those algorithms come from 2 places. The algorithms come from the programmers, but they also come from the data that they're ingesting. So sometimes these algorithms will construct a bias just by observing people's behavior, right? And so it's really important that we have mechanisms that take algorithms out of the black box and allow us to examine the implicit bias. But this is such a big and challenging question. This would be a great example of the kind of thing that I'd love to ask juniors and seniors and say, this is such a big deal. We're going to clear the next month, and you're going to spend half of your time investigating this and presenting to City Council and the Chamber and at the state legislature a set of recommendations for how we can change this. I mean, what more important thing do they have to do right now than that, right? They're living in a world where you just don't know which way's up and what's true and what's not. It seems obvious to me that we got to get on that, and you and I don't know what the answers are, so this would be a really great thing to engage a community dialogue and say, what can we do to change the world that we live in? Anybody else have a harder question? Yes.
A little bit harder. You talked about, and I appreciate you talking about your granddaughter and all of the access that she will grow up having to all of the information that's out there. A lot of us come from communities where a large portion of the population doesn't have broadband, doesn't have access to the internet. So how do we make sure that those learning opportunities are available to everyone and not just to a few?
So the second book that you have is Smart Parents, and the dilemma, like what problem you're trying to solve with the Smart Parents book is that one, which is now that we've almost closed the digital divide. You just said we haven't really done that but almost every kid in every school comes to school with a cell phone, right? So we're getting closer to the divide, and most schools have some devices, so at least the digital divide is narrowed. Now the new divide is between kids that have parents that use technology for good and kids that don't have an advocate at home who's thinking about technology. So technology is an amplifier. It makes good parents better, and it makes kids that don't have access to thoughtful adults really disadvantaged. So there's a new divide, and it's the parent divide. It's the guidance divide. Is there one or two adults in your life that are helping you make really good choices about the technologies that you use? So unfortunately, this is as thorny a problem as the truthiness problem, because there is no simple answer to how we solve that. Right, we can start by making sure that every kid is known and cared for at school. This is particularly important at the secondary level, where if you don't have an advisory system, you need to start one like next week or at least next September, where every kid interacts every day or most days with an adult who knows a lot about them and checks in with them, looks into their eyes and says, "How are you doing today?" Who cares that they're at school, right? So that seems like the first line of defense, to make sure that there's somebody at school that you have a sustained relationship with that's helping you make good decisions. Man, it really helps if somebody at home or in the community is also playing that role out of school. We could have a longer chat about how we do that. That's another. This would be a really good community conversation to say, how do we as a community help kids make good tech choices? That's another not simple answer to this problem. But we wrote Smart Parents to try to give some simple advice to parents to say, it's really important for you to be informed, to be involved, to be intentional about creating positive learning experiences outside of school. In other words, it's more important to be a parent than ever, right? And to be inspirational, to live a life where you're a humble learner, where your kids see you try stuff and fail sometimes, and where that's okay, right? Where you admit to your kids, I don't know what the answer to that is. How might we attack that problem together, right? But it's a tough question.
Where do you see the spaces for the conversation? So in terms of these conversations, to start to understand this new world, where do you see the spaces for that?
Yeah, that's a great question. Where's the space for the conversation? So, you remember Tony Wagner? So, let's say, well, you remember Rudy Crew was the superintendent in Tacoma, and and then he went to New York City. So Rudy was kind of my mentor, and he said, one thing you should do, send your principals to Harvard, and they have a really good training program. And my principals all came back and they said, there's this guy named Tony Wagner, and he kind of sounds like you, but we understand what he's saying. And so we invited Tony to become our district coach. And Tony said, it's really simple. You create community meetings. It helps if kids sing, and if you feed them, right? So pizza and choir and pizza and band will get people to come, and then you ask these questions. How has the world changed since you were in school? As a result, what should kids know and be able to do? What kinds of learning experiences might help promote those knowledge, skills, and dispositions? So between Tony and I, we've had that conversation with hundreds of communities. Most recently, we did this in all the middle schools in El Paso. And we'd do the mariachi band and the finger food, and then the questions would come out in English and Spanish. And it was, how has the world changed? What do kids need to know and be able to do? And they came up with a beautiful graduate profile. Houston has done the same thing. Marion, Ohio has done the same thing. Danville, Kentucky has done the same thing. In fact, there's been hundreds of schools and districts that have had this sort of a conversation. There's a new website that was launched Thursday called profilesofagraduate.org. It came from EdLeader 21, which is, we were talking earlier about plugging into PLCs. You know, if you're a school or district leader, 187 districts have joined this edleader21.com, which is a kind of a professional learning community for superintendents. And they created this free open resource, and it includes a gallery of all the communities that have had this conversation and how they've distilled a new set of student learning outcomes, and then a process that you can go through to do it in your own community. So I think superintendents have to own this conversation. It most effectively happens when you do it with your Chamber of Commerce. So Marion, Ohio, we've written about them before. A great example of a Chamber of Commerce and a school district sort of co-hosting conversations about what does this mean for us. Marion, Ohio. One of the cool things that came from that conversation is Ramtech, RAMTEC, ramtechohio.org. Here's what happened as a result of this conversation. The local Career Center director, Dr. Chuck Spellman, had a conversation he'd never had with the business leaders. They said, Chuck, stop training kids in robotics because we just have to redo it when they come to work. And he said, well, what would I have to do it well? And he said, FANUC and Motoman. That's the two robots that we all use. If you certify them in the stuff that we actually use, we'll hire your kids. So they had been doing this generic stuff that wasn't worthwhile at all. And he said, I'll do that. They gave him $5 million to build a brand new facility. And 2 years ago, I met a kid named Scott Gold, who was the first teenager that was certified in a Motoman and FANUC. As soon as he was, Honda hired him. They gave him a college scholarship, so he'll finish a 2-year degree next month. He trains at the community college center, Tri-Rivers Community College, and American Honda flies him around to train adults to use both FANUC and Motoman. So he's going to finish college with $100,000 in his pocket. So that's like, oh man, I didn't get CT at all until I saw this work and learn thing where you can actually get a really good job while you're in high school, right, and keep learning. That this definitely isn't going to preclude further learning opportunities for Scott, but it was because the chamber and the district had this conversation where they really listened to each other about what will it really take. I just looked it up this morning. There are 23 Ramtech sites around the state of Ohio now. So this is really spread all over the state at one successful program. So I think chamber, school district, I think groups like ForwARd Arkansas are another great place to have this conversation. You probably can't have it in too many places. I would try to rally faith congregations to be part of the conversation. I worked really hard at that when I was a superintendent. It worked only moderately well, but I think you have to try. I spent my weekends in the pulpit or between services in the narthex and just talking about what can we do to do our job better? What do you think kids need to know and be able to do? So take your show on the road to anybody that'll have the conversation with you. We probably have a couple minutes, a couple more. Anything else? All right. If not, I have one slide I want to show you. This is what my new book is on. Susan and I were having lunch talking about the last 25 years have been really weird, this weird juxtaposition of standards-based reform, testing, and computers. And in some ways they sort of fit together, in some ways they were sort of completely at odds with each other. But they did result in new tools and new schools, so that's really what we're talking about. It's the opportunity set in the middle. But we said, man, it's really complicated, so it really takes help. It takes intermediaries. Cities are a big deal. I'm not optimistic about having a good national conversation. I am really optimistic about having really good local conversations. And now that the feds are out of the education business, it's up to you. You don't have to ask permission, right? It is up to you. You used to have to go ask permission, and now I think it's like, who's going to stop me? So I think take advantage of doing cool stuff. This is smart cities. The slide that I wanted to show you, it takes an innovation mindset. If you want kids to have an innovation mindset, you need one as well. I talked about platforms and platform networks. I want you to think about this. This is the outline for my new book, which says personalized project-based learning, really big deal. Seems like a big opportunity to both help kids accelerate their learning and engage them in really cool stuff. I call that a learning model. And then designing a school model around it, like you guys have, I think that's a really important asset. So if you don't join a network like New Tech Network or EL Education, the Expeditionary Learning, what's that? Or one of the other couple great networks, then you have to do that work yourself. So you have to be really smart or have really good friends to develop a really good learning model. I'm a big fan of platform-centric models that share a platform. I think in the next few years, all schools, whether they're in a district that uses a platform or they're in a network that uses a platform, there'll be a model supported by a platform, supported by professional learning opportunities. So if you're a superintendent, I'd love to have you, I'd love in the next few minutes to engage with you sort of around this formula and how are you thinking about it? Are you constructing that formula, or are your schools constructing that formula, or do they have the opportunity to work with somebody who's constructed that formula? But I think putting those three things together, that's when I said earlier, this stuff is brain surgery and rocket science together. That formula is complicated. It's hard to build a learning model and an IT stack and entry points for adults to be successful. So.
How, for the rural micro schools?
Oh yeah. Where were we going to talk? Oh, I think that was, I had a quick comment on that front. These are, the point here is every city or every region, I think I would argue, needs a set of intermediaries that provide some local expertise, some incubation. A harbor master is somebody who's sort of taken ownership for outcomes for a group of kids in a region. So some of that can be local. Some of the other stuff that you need, talent development partnerships, these things can be regional or national in scope, but I think every region needs to benefit from all of those. These are really cool examples from New Tech, but I'll mention them really quickly. One challenge of rural schools is it's hard to do really good work-based learning. And cross-county, has created these virtual internships, and they've got hundreds of really cool mentors. This is an MIT prof, and this is, she's a scientist from GlaxoSmithKline in Belgium. So, and I think it was just blood, sweat, and tears, like they were dialing for mentors, right? And they got this really amazing group of people to sign on. So it's not like there's an easy shortcut, it was hard work. So I want to mention micro schools. This is a really interesting new opportunity, and with New Tech, we've been talking about this for a year. Have any of you guys heard of 4.0 schools in New Orleans? So 4.0 is sort of a leading advocate for micro schools. Micro schools are anything from 2 to 150 kids. So they're really small schools. And what Matt Candler at 4.0 argues, one, we need to try stuff now, but two, there's no point in taking really big risks, either for you or for your kids. So if you have a new conception of how school could work, instead of going through a 2-year planning cycle and a bond and having a planning team and opening a school 5 years from now, try something on Saturday with 6 kids. And if that seems to work, run summer school for a week with 30 kids. And if that seems to work, do a little pop-up academy, a school within a school with 30 kids and one teacher next fall. And if that seems to work, expand it to a full-sized academy. So starting from no stakes to low stakes to limited stakes, give yourself and an idea a chance to stick around. So I love that idea. I was in Denver last week, and they're planning a network of micro schools across the city. They hope that there's a network of these small teacher-led schools, like 2 teachers and 40 kids, that will stay micro schools. They hope that some grow into larger schools, and they hope that some are useful experiments that get absorbed into the host school. So they hope by launching what could be 50 or 100 of these micro schools that they'll create really interesting benefits across the city of Denver. I think there could be a really interesting rural network of micro schools. I think this is a great opportunity for communities that have lost their high school. I mean, I think that's a terrible thing that's happened in thousands of particularly in Western cities, where when the high school closes, it really sucks the spirit out of a place. And I think we have the chance now to reopen really interesting, community-connected secondary schools. And they might be 40 kids, they might be 60 kids, but they might have really intimate relationships with businesses and parks and churches in a community. And you could have a network of 50 of these around Arkansas that serve rural communities. They might be connected to a big school that's a half an hour away, and maybe the kids go to that big school a day a week. So maybe it's a hub and spoke model that works for you. But I think that would be a really interesting thought experiment to discuss further here, the chance to create really good, really interesting micro schools. We have a campaign on our site called Place-Based Ed. You guys have written for that. Place-based education is really giving the gift of place. It's engaging kids where they live. It's leveraging local assets. It's getting kids out into the community, bringing the community into the school. And I think micro schools are particularly good at that. Thanks for the conversation.
So you're not as much of a gender as you used to be.